Good evening, everybody. We are pleased to begin a brand new chapter this evening. As we concluded last week, the 42nd chapter, we begin Perek Mem Gimel, which is found in the original text on page 122. You could see it on the corresponding English text as well. Those of you who follow on the internet, primarily there's the English text and there's the English and Hebrew, but it follows the lessons of Tanya, which is namely the English translation and explanation. You can see it on the screen, and it's an easy way to follow generally these classes because, as we mentioned in the past, there's a separate scroll bar for the English for the text accordingly. As well, there's the easy access to all the previous chapters. For example, all the previous classes. That is, for example, the previous classes of the entire 42nd chapter, and for that matter, all the way back from the very beginning of the Tanya. And you can see it again. There's an additional scroll bar with all these classes, and when you click on them, it comes up in the same format, a separate scroll bar with the text, as such easy to follow. Again, that's on the tanyaonline.com website. So we begin Perek Mem Gimel, the 43rd chapter, on this inferior fear, literally translated. So we spoke in the Perek Mem Beis, in the 42nd chapter, of the fear which is part and parcel of every single Yid. It's not a chidush, it's not something new, it's not a novelty in this whole idea of fear of Hashem. This is embedded in every single Yid. As Alter Rebbe explains there, this is coming from the Moshe Rabbeinu, if you will, the chip of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is part of the program of every single Yid. And as such, fear is something, as a default, fear is something natural to him. With this stuff, you recall that Alter Rebbe explains the Gemara. The Gemara says that Moshe Rabbeinu seems in the statements of Ma Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Chalakim Liyiras Hashem. What is Hashem already asking from you? Just to fear Hashem? The Gemara says really fear is something which is not something which is small, the way Moshe places it. And what does the Gemara answer? Yes, by Moshe Rabbeinu, it's something which is simple. It's something which is even small. Milsa Zutra Sehi. It's small. But Alter Rebbe asked, Moshe Rabbeinu was talking to Am Yisrael. He was asking, this is a rhetorical presentation or question to Am Yisrael. So if it's default by Moshe Rabbeinu, if it's the norm by Moshe Rabbeinu, if it's even small by Moshe Rabbeinu, what does it have to do with every Yid? So what does the Alter Rebbe say? There is the Moshe, and this is really what the Gemara meant. There is the Moshe, and therefore the Gemara was just fine to answer that question. Yes, Lagabe Moshe Rabbeinu, Gemara knew that the context of the pasuk of the verses that Moshe Rabbeinu is talking to Am Yisrael, to the Jew, to the people. But the Gemara just answered the question that in the face of Moshe Rabbeinu, this is Milsa Zutra Sehi, it is small, it is the regular. And because the Alter Rebbe explains over here that the Gemara means that there's the Moshe Rabbeinu within every single Yid. And from the perspective of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is again embedded in every single Yid, Yira becomes fear of Hashem, becomes the norm. It is the default of a Yid, which is part of Hashem, and as well has that das and Hashem. Remember the Alter Rebbe in the 3rd chapter, it says this neshama, which is part of Hashem, is comprised from 10 levels, the 10 spheres. So one of them is das Hashem, but Moshe Rabbeinu infuses that das and grandizes that, or makes that das completely puts it into complete function, in order that the Yid, which has this neshama, should be able to have that clarity in Hashem, which causes that yira, that fear of Hashem, and as such, the Yid who fears Hashem, again elaborated in the. Actually, we had 11 classes on the 42nd chapter. We did mention, if you recall, it is a lengthier chapter, but to have clarity in this matter, obviously, for the newcomers, you ought to invest in that 42nd chapter. time and focus. So the Rebbe says because of that, obviously, keeping Torah mitzvahs is a given. Staying away from that level of that intense fear and awe of Hashem, or revering reverence of Hashem, the idea of staying away from evil and doing good, which is sur meira na'aseh tov, not doing what Hashem says not to do, or not to speak, or not to think, and doing what Hashem says to do, to speak and to think, is again consequent, is naturally aligned with this fear, and comes from when the Yid has the fear. Doing what Hashem wants is again something which follows suit. So on the Alter Rebbe begins on this Yira, which is Tata, which is the inferior Yira. As Alter Rebbe mentioned before, the inferior Yira, in other words, it is an inferior Yira, because Alter Rebbe is going to introduce to us that there's the superior Yira. He did note to this idea in the 42nd chapter, but here in this chapter, the Alter Rebbe elaborates. Apparently, this seems to be a kind of, if you have das, if you have that clarity in God and godliness, so why does it arouse a fear which would be categorized as an inferior fear? And why inferior? Apparently, if you have that clarity in godliness, it should arouse a complete fear. Why is it still called tata? An inferior type of reverence of Hashem. Why so? And what would be Yirei Lo? If you go through the different terminologies Alter Rebbe used, or the step-by-step contemplation, again aligned with that das in Elokus, that knowledge, that clarity, that transparency in Elokus, which leads to the fear, it apparently should bring to a very complete, comprehensive fear, which would say that, okay, I have it all. What does it mean an inferior fear? Still holding in an inferior level of Yiras Hashem, an inferior level of reverence of Hashem. Why inferior? And what is it? And what is the definition of inferior? And what would be the superior Yira? This the Alter Rebbe explains, and in detail in this very 43rd chapter, and that's why he begins the chapter Yira Tatazu. It's inferior. And based on this inferior Yira, which we're going to see why it's called inferior, which leads to the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs, in other words, the Yid complying with the Sur Meira and the Asay Tov, staying away from evil and doing good. On this, it says, Ein Yira Ein Chochma. Ein Yira Ein Chochma. There's no fear, there's no wisdom. Now, Alter Rebbe is alluding to the famous Mishnah, which says if there is, in Pirkei Avos, that is, in the ethics of our fathers, the Mishnah states, Im ein yira, im ein chochma. Im ein chochma, ein yira. If there's no fear, there's no wisdom, which is naturally the wisdom of Torah on the surface. And then if there's no wisdom, there's no fear. So really, which one do you start? You're going to start with fear. You say, hey, you can't start with fear. You have to start with wisdom. And if you're going to start with the wisdom, you're going to say, the Mishnah says, Im ein yira, ein chochma. If there's no fear, there's no wisdom. So which one do you start? And how do you start? And how does it work? It seems to be contradicting one each other. It's paradoxical, the Mishnah itself. So the commentaries deal with this Mishnah, but Alter Rebbe says it's not a contradiction at all. It's not paradoxical, because the Yira in the first part of the Mishnah is not the same Yira of the second part of the Mishnah. It means to say the fear, the level of fear in the first part of the Mishnah is not the same level of fear of the second part of the Mishnah. Well, the first part of the Mishnah, where it says Imen Yira in Chochma, is dealing with this very inferior type of fear. That inferior type of fear leads to Chochma, leads to wisdom, and in this case, the Chochma of Torah, that bittul, that self-nullification, which is demanded of the Yid, and is synonymous with the Yid's submission to Hashem's commandments of Sur Meira Na'aseh Tov, staying away from evil and doing good, doing Hashem's mitzvahs, learning His Torah. As opposed to the second part of the Mishnah, which says, Ein Chochma Ein Yira. This Yira, this fear is talking about a supreme Yira, a superior Yira. And that is a total different type of fear of Hashem, which one will right away ask, apparently everything we learned in the 42nd chapter, can there be anything greater in the experience of awe of Hashem more than this which is illustrated in the 42nd chapter? And which we introduce over here, which again leads the person into a complete compliance with Hashem's demands on the Sur Meirah, staying away from evil level, and the Asay Tov, and doing the positive, 100%. And especially the way, again, it was illustrated, step by step, the whole sensation of this Yira in the 42nd chapter. What could be greater than that? But Alter Rebbe is going to point out there is something greater, a greater level of fear, which is led through the Chokhmah. More so, the Alter Rebbe says, is synonymous with the deeper idea of what Chokhmah is, but on the surface, the Alter Rebbe is saying that you need to have that Chokhmah, you need to be complete in Hashem's Torah, which Hashem's Torah is, in the end of the day, Hashem invested his core essence in his Torah, and when you learn Torah, for the sake of Torah, that is naturally, then you do Hashem's mitzvahs, that total, constant nullification and submission to Hashem, you gain a higher and more and deeper and more of a profound level of Yiras Hashem, a fearing of Hashem, which is called Yirah Ilah. And again, it's not just a bit greater, it's a total different type of Yirah, as we will see, the Alter Rebbe as he explains what the Yirah is all about. But he gains that Yirah Ilah, that supreme Yirah, via going through the stages, the rungs of the first, the Yirah Tata, the lower level of the Yirah. And with this he gains that pull, or the inevitable consequence of that Yirah Tata, the inferior Yirah, of the Yid abiding by Shulchan Aruch, by Hashem's commands in Surah Meirah and Asay Tov, the negative and the positive. And when he expresses that constancy in both the first level of Yirah, which led to a life of scrupulous Torah mitzvahs, abiding by Torah mitzvahs, learning Hashem's Torah and abiding his complying with Hashem's mitzvahs scrupulously, again with constancy, that leads to a higher level. The person is automatically, consequently elevated to a new dimension, a new dynamic of Yiras Hashem, of fearing God. And so this is the reconciliation of the Mishnah. The first Yirah speaks about the inferior Yirah. So main Yirah in Chokhmah, as we mentioned, again, the Yiras Hashem will lead to Surah Meirah and Asay Tov, to abiding or aligning oneself with Chokhmas Hashem, the wisdom of Hashem, basically Hashem's Torah and His mitzvahs. And then when you continue with the Chokhmah, that leads you to the Yirah, to the higher level of Yirah. So let's see. So the Alter Rebbe says, this Yirah Tata, this inferior Yirah, which leads to Kiyum Torah mitzvahs, in Surah Meirah and Asay Tov, this is what the Mishnah says in Yirah in Chokhmah. The Rebbe continues, the Rebbe continues, V'yesh b'bchinas gadlus. There is smallness and greatness, literally translated, in this very Yirah Tata. What is the katnus? The Rebbe doesn't elaborate what the katnus is over here. What is the smallness in Yirah Tata? Isn't Yirah Tata itself an expression of inferior Yirah? Would suggest it's small, what the Alter Rebbe says. No, there's gadlus, there's greatness in this Yirah. There's greatness in this Yirah Tata. So what is the smallness of this Yirah Tata? The Alter Rebbe doesn't say. The Alter Rebbe doesn't need to say, because this is the Yiras Hashem a Yid has. A Yid is a Yirei Shamayim, by definition. He fears God. He has a neshama. So from a perspective of somebody, he's always standing in front of God. He has that Yirah Mesuteres, like the Alter Rebbe writes earlier in Tanya. He has that Nichlol Bogam Tchilu, that Yirah, that simple Yiras Shamayim a Yid has. That is the Yirah Tata. That's the Katnos. Why is it katnus? Because it's a natural yira. Now, natural yira could be stronger than a yira based on contemplation and meditation. Granted, but nonetheless, it's Al Rebbe used the lashon that the ava tivis is ava mesoteres, because it's deep and it's, in one hand, it's part and parcel of who the yid is, but not necessarily it comes out in a passionate manner, because again, anything which is inherent and innate, not necessarily, it's very deep and very profound and very well anchored, but nonetheless, it does not necessarily come out passionately. We gave the example the other day. The Alter Rebbe himself writes, the Torah, there's a chais and a kala. When someone's related to a sister, for example, the connection is very deep, but it's not passionate. It's not meant to be passionate, understandably. So there's the two advantages, right? Therefore, we once explained this in previous classes, that you can't divorce a sibling by definition, because the connection is very deep. Conversely, there's no passionate connection. Again, it's not meant to be so, of course. And conversely, when it comes to Rayasi, the Kala is someone who you learned about, you studied, you met, and you studied the other party. At that point, you meditated on the great qualities of this other party. That causes not only some type of closeness, but a very passionate closeness, which has production and so on. The great virtue of the union of Chosin and Kala, in this case, Hashem and his people. And Hashem says, yes, we have both of them. We have the Achaisi and we have the Rayasi connection. Because the innate love is that Achaisi, which is this the katnus. So katnus doesn't mean like a negative term over here. This is this Yiras Shamayim Yid has. But then there's the gadlus within Yirat Hatah itself, the greatness within Yirat Hatah, which is taking the time to ponder and meditate on the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which ignites the passion of this Yira. In other words, the Yiras Hashem is a passionate fear, is a passionate reverence, because it comes from one's serious meditation on the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So he goes on, B'chinas Gadlus. What is the Gadlus? When this comes, of pondering and meditating the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That this the dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how he fills the worlds. And Me'oretz L'Rakia Mahalach Tav Kuf Shana. The Alter Rebbe is going to go into details of this, his beinenus, of this meditation in the Malach Almin, which right away tells us, and this is Alter Rebbe's message going to be, why it's called Yirat Hatah. Well, if he's pondering and meditating in the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so his heart is engulfed in a flame of fear, in this case fear. Later the Alter Rebbe is going to speak about the levels or the expressions of love as well, right? The Neshama has Chesed, Gvurot, Tiferet, Netzach, Yisei, Malchus. In other words, it's combined of all Hashem's midas, all Hashem's spheres. So the Neshama has that ability to ignite a love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a passionate love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but so too a passionate fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a passionate reverence and awe of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which this Alter Rebbe begins with in this chapter. So apparently, why doesn't it lead to a full-fledged Yira? Why is it still called Tata, inferior Yira? So Alter Rebbe says, this which is igniting the fear is a hisbonenus, is a meditation of the inferior expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, hence the fear which is aroused and ignited from this meditation is also inferior. What does mean an inferior expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Isn't God is God is God is God. If it's Hashem, it's Hashem. And there's Hashem is infinite, and pondering on Hashem's greatness is pondering on Hashem's infinity. So apparently that should lead to kind of an infinite type of yira. In this context would be a yira ilah, the greatest level of fear, because you're meditating on, what is it? Meditating on Hashem, which is infinite. So where is the inferiority? Where is where does that whole term exist when it comes to Hashem? that Dalton's message would lead that this is producing an inferior type of fear. So this concept is not totally new to us. We learned it in the past that Hashem also has two ways of expressing himself. One, the Memali Kol Almin dynamic, and then the Seviv Kol Almin dynamic. The dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way he's for himself, by himself, beyond being a creator. Because Hashem, the famous Mekubal said, this is not the greatness of Hashem as a creator. In other words, when we look at Hashem, wow, he created the entire world and so on and so forth. This is the greatest Yerida, this is the greatest descent of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a degradation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu coming from him for who he is, for himself, by himself, transcendent of any limitation, certainly not Olam's world, which worlds are by definition the highest levels of world for that matter. But Olam, as the Gemara says in Lashon Helam Behester, it conceals, it covers up over the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When you say Hashem created, became a creator, that's the greatest descent of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he leaves his state of infinite state and allows worlds to come into being and creates them, vivifies them, and he is and not only at a certain time by the 6 days of creation, but we say he's always vitalizing creation. In other words, the Hashem is always pulling himself down to be a Beit Elam, because for Hashem to be a creator is a great descent. It's like some great professor which is going to give the presentation of his lifetime. And someone's going to compliment him, when he walked from his car to the hall, he moved a few pebbles, so he made a little change in the ant kingdom under the pebbles. And that's what he is going to describe, or at least even part of the description of the greatness of this professor. It's nonsense. Why are you dignifying something so trivial, something so petty, something so small? When it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the fact that Hashem is a Beirei Olam is a Yerida, it's a descent for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That he has to be that he's a Beirei Olam, Melashon Helam V'Hester, that he removed his infinite light, because we know that in the presence of Hashem's infinite light, there could not be any Olamis. If there's from the Ein Sof perspective, the Hashem's infinite glory and infinite light, there couldn't have been a Mitzias, a reality of Olamis, worlds which by definition are limited. Even the highest level of Olam, which is known to be Atzilus, which Atzilus is so many Svarim, it speaks about Atzilus being hosting the Ein Sof, and every midah in Atzilus has a certain Ein Sof dynamic to it, but it's still a midah, midida, v'hakbala, measurement, limitation, confinement. Where does that exist in the Ein Sof? In the Ein Sof, it doesn't exist. Midida, hagbala, limitations. In the Ein Sof, this doesn't exist. So when Hashem has to conceal and contract his great earth and to deal with Olam as being a matzil, an emanator, a creator, it is the greatest descent of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he becomes a Beirei. And we say that Marabo Masech Hashem, to find godliness within creation, it's nice, but we should never chas v'shalom to find, wow, did you see all that? What I saw? Look how great Hashem is. There is a true dimension to that as well. It's a pasuk in Tehillim, Marabo Masech Hashem, Agadol Masech Hashem, and this is the basic message of Baruchi Nafshi, famous Baruchi Nafshi, which David HaMelech said. Granted, but that's a great Yerida in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A descent in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he leaves his state of Ein Sof in the Lashon of the Arizal, based on the Eitzer Chaim, that the Tzimtzum Harishin, the Eibishter had to remove his infinite light in order to allow the being, the ability for Olamis to exist. And naturally, they don't have their independence. It's not like they were looking for their way in, and Hashem removed his infinite light and he let them in, but they're kind of an independent being that obviously doesn't exist. Nothing's independent other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the only one who vitalizes and gives the chayis, the energy into these very Eilamis. Eilam Atzilus, and even further, Bri, Yitzira, Asiya, every blade, every part and parcel, every nakud, every particle of the entire world, on every single level, starting from Eilam Hazeh Gashmi, every detail, every nuance, detail, every particle is only exists only because Hamachadish Betuvi B'cholim Tovim Masverish, the Eibishter pumps his energy into creation. And then there's the Yitzira and Bria and Hayden and Atzilus, and it says there's so many more elements, even though they're generally compartmentalized into these four. So the Eibishter is the only one who is keeping these elements alive, emanating Elam Atzilus, creating Elam Bria, and so on and so forth. But this is the way the Eibishter was mitzamtzim, contracted his great Eir in order to create. Why did he do all that? So this we learned in Perek Lamed Vav, which seems like, why did you go away from the Ein Sof? Why did you allow the Ein Sof just to be? In other words, it could be a complete bittul. Nothing could have ever existed. It would be just Ein Sof. That would have been wonderful. What's the point of contracting your infinite light and creating Eilamis, which is such a hell and behester, by definition of who they are, even the greatest Eilam, even the highest level of Eilam, Eilam HaAtzilus, it's an Eilam which conceals the reality of Hashem, by definition of it being an Eilam, despite hosting the Ein Sof, and again, as explained in Kabbalah and so many areas in Chassidus. And the answer to it, the Eibishter wanted a Dira B'Tachtenim, the Eibishter wanted a dwelling place in this very physical world. Again, you can see it over here also in Perek Lamed Vav and Lamed Zayin, a bit further as well. And the whole reason why Hashem did this in order because He wanted this very world to be created, and the Yid should come into a neshama, should come into a guf, into a body, and do and bring the awareness, the godly reality into Eilam, and that's why Hashem created all this, and He allowed this all to happen, or He not allowed this to happen. He made it happen. But again, it's not the scope of tonight's class. Again, you can see it in those chapters, which is again one click away, basically. But in this context, it's the Hashem certainly. In other words, it's a great descent of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but nonetheless, He's the one who is Mahava Mechayim Mekayim, pumping this energy and life source and life stream into every single created being, which that's the term of Memali Kol Almin. How the Eibishter is vitalizing Eilamis, giving them their existence, giving them their definition, giving them their makeup. As we mentioned in the past, even in this very physical world, why does the apple look like an apple and the orange look like an orange? If it's just the flow of energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu coming in to this world, which is creating every detail in this world, why does this look different than that? The answer is, there is a specific energy which comes into the apple tree, which produces apples and looks and tastes like the apple. And there's another type of energy which is coming into to Eilam, which is creating the orange and making the orange look and taste like the orange. And so too the billions and billions of different details within Eilam. This is all with the maximum precision of an energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Obviously, it's to person one could be very much nispal, impacted marveled by the greatness of this Memalik Kalalmin dynamic. No question, even though it's a descent of HaKadosh, it's a yerida of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to place himself into this state of Memalik Kalalmin, going away for himself, the way he's for himself, by himself, in his infinite presence, and descending and creating this finite reality, starting from the highest levels. But it's still to be marveled. This is extraordinary. Every single blade of grass has a certain energy which is being created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And what happened if Hashem pulled that energy from that blade of grass? What would happen? It would just disappear. It wouldn't just tear off, decay. It would just disappear. And if this tree, Hashem stops giving chayas to this tree, it would disappear. Because the only energy everything has is only coming from Hashem. As the Alter Rebbe elaborates in Shari Yechid V'Emunah, which is the second part of Tanya, that it's the Dvar Hashem, it's the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is constantly creating, not only created in the sixth day of creation, which is constantly creating and pumping energy into every detail of creation. And the moment Hashem ceases to create or to give energy to that particular created being, it would just disappear, because its whole being is just because Hashem wants it to be. And Hashem not only wants it to be, but He is pumping the energy into it. We spoke about this in the past. Why do we have to say that it's constant? Why can't we just say Hashem just created the world in 6 days of creation and just let it be? But again, it's inevitable. It's understandable that it ought to be so. We once spoke about it in the past because it's just a mere opposite of the way it's meant to be. It's like you throw a ball upwards. It's just the time or that state of it's being thrown upwards is just that amount of energy that you invested in it. Is it going to do opposite than its nature? In other words, everything gravitates downwards. Take a ball, open your hand, it'll fall down. Why is it flying high? Because you pumped a certain energy and you're allowing to imbue in that ball to do something, to express itself, to act in a way of contrary to its very existence, or very nature rather, which is to gravitate downwards. But follow that ball. The moment your energy dissipates, it's rushing right back down to its very nature. So the energy has to be constantly, in other words, this which you pumped into the ball, that energy that you invested in that throw, into that shot, and that is allowing the ball to do it contrary to its nature, which is again to gravitate downwards. But the moment the energy it reduces and more as it climbs on high, it will fall right back down. So the whole reason why it was able to do contrary to its energy, to its nature, is because you pumped in a certain energy into the ball to fly high, to fly upwards, as opposed to following its natural, so to say, instinctive nature, which is to gravitate downwards. So what do you see from this is only because you put in a certain, again, it left your hand, but it's doing opposite than its nature. It's flying high. It's flying upwards, rather. And the reason is because there's a certain energy that you're pumping into it. And the same thing, it's not part of the scope of today's class. The fact that the Olam exists is just opposite than it's, so to say, so naturally meant to be. Meant to be is Hashem, and Hashem's presence is infinite, so nothing should exist. If Hashem is deciding that it should exist, Hashem has to constantly pump in energy into creation to it. So if you see a stone, it looks like it's just there, because it's just there, and probably it's fixed in, it's just doesn't seem like anything, it's connected to anything. Sometimes you look at anything which is alive, you see, well, a certain, and you could identify a certain energy which is vivifying it and making it function and talk and think and move and grow, again, on the four elements of the Daimim, Tzemech, Chaim, Medaber. But if you see a stone, you just say it's lifeless. Where's the energy? But the answer is no, as the Alter Rebbe explains, Bidvar Hashem Shamayim Nasu, Uveruach Piv Kol Tzavot, that everything comes from Hashem's speech, which means Hashem is talking creation into being. And if you see a stone, the reason why you can see it, why it exists, because Hashem is pumping creation energy into that stone. The moment Hashem stops pumping energy into that stone, the stone will just simply disappear. Disappear into nothing is no thing at all. And that is extraordinary. And that is fascinating. Appreciating that everything you see in front of your own eyes is a manifestation of Hashem's presence within creation. It's fascinating. And that causes a great closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in this cause of fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. For I appreciate the reignship of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the dominance of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's the sole creator, and he is the one who constantly is vivifying and vitalizing everything I see in front of me. And then I learn a little bit more, a little Kabbalah and Chassidus. I know this is not the first Eilam. There's Eilam is one Eilam higher and yet higher. And then there's a little Rambam that Rambam tells us about the different levels of angels and namely Kabbalah and Chassidus, different so many different levels within Ishtalshalos, with the evolution of Eilam is one from the other. And again, all dictate with the maximum precision. Remember, HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, it is extraordinary. And it causes that this fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because I'm standing in the presence of this great creator, this great king, which not only has power over his country, he is the creator of his country, which obviously doesn't exist by a king of flesh and blood. So Memalek Kol Almin is the Hashem being that Memalek Kol Almin is indeed extraordinary. And it does arouse an enormous fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Alter Rebbe is going to say, though, that in the end of the day, it's an expression of the inferior dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, by definition, the fear is an inferior fear, because it's coming from a place that's telling me I exist. As we mentioned as well in the past, Memalek Kol Almin could never cause a bittul b'mitzias. The two expressions, bittul hayesh and bittul b'mitzias. Bittul hayesh means I am, but I submit myself, I nullify myself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But I'm still a mitzias. Bittul b'mitzias means I'm totally not. And that's obviously a much deeper level of a bittul, of a sense of nullity and submissiveness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It says a number of places, the difference of Avraham Avinu, which is pre-Matan Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu, which is post-Matan Torah, which was caused through the Keich of Torah, Chochmah and Yira. Through the Keich of this Chochmah, Moshe Rabbeinu, you reach the Yiras Hashem, the climactic level of Yiras Hashem, that he says, I'm nothing. Not I'm something which is batul to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He says, V'nachnu ma. Ma means nothing. Chochmah. That's why you can appreciate the term in the Mishnah. It doesn't say if you don't have Torah mitzvahs, you don't have Yira. You have Chochmah. Because Chochmah is that Kayachma, that bittul, again, which is the embodiment of Chochmah. Ma. Moshe Rabbeinu says, V'nachnu ma. Avraham Avinu says, V'anechi ofar v'efer. I'm earth and dust, which was again an expression of Avraham Avinu's bittul to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but he still said, I'm dust, I'm earth, it's a mitzias. It's something. It's tangible. Ofar is palpable. That's the term in Chassidus. It says a number of places because it was pre-Matan Torah. Shmi Hashem le'nei daiti lehem. Because Shmi Hashem is that exposure. Hashem exposed the level of Shem Havaya, Seviv Klam, the way He's for Himself, by Himself, which is the infinite level of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in the face of infinity, everything is truly not. From the perspective of Seviv Kol Almin. He's transcendent of Eilumis, meaning because this is the full exposure of the Ein Sof, the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which again, in the face of the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, everything is truly not. The message of Seviv Kol Almin, it's not you. Everything is, nothing really can exist in the face of Seviv Kol Almin. And that's the Shem Havaya, which was revealed by Matan Torah, starting from Yitzias Mitzrayim. That's what Hashem's told Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu was Moshe Kibul Torah Misinai. He reached that level of V'nachnu ma, nothing at all, not even offer and maven. So these two terms of bittul b'mitzias and bittul hayesh is the theme over here. While Yira Tato would cause the bittul hayesh. I am, but I submit myself. I'm subordinate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Bittul b'mitzias, a total sense of nothingness, a total nullification, an absolute nullification. That is the bittul b'mitzias, and not at all. That is Yirei Lo. That's the supreme fear. Again, not to jump the gun. And why does this pondering on HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Memalek Kol Almin just cause bittul hayesh? Why not cause bittul b'mitzias? I see everything as Hashem. Hashem is everything, and I can't even wrap my mind even over Memalek Kol Almin. Hashem creates every single elam with the exact dosage and with the exact with exact amount of energy which creates the stone, and that another amount of energy which creates the chai, the tzemeach, the botanical world and vegetation, and then there's the chai, the animal kingdom or the animal world of this. Not only grows from katnus to gadlus, from smallness to grandness, like a tree, or greatness and so on, or grandness. This is already moves and has certain feelings and appreciates the the world of the animal. Again, doesn't have the intellect with the human being has, but nonetheless it grows and it moves and so on, or it moves and it's able to eat and drink and so on. And then you have the medaber, which is the human being, which has the yisrin ha'adam mina behema, the fact that he has the seichel intellect. So all this apparently, and again in so many different levels, and again the more one studies Kabbalah and Chassidus realizes the Olam there's no end. People in Gemara says that there's infinite amount of camps, and in every camp there's tens of thousands of angels. I mean, just one can apparently not even just minimally wrap his mind around, have a somewhat of an adequate appreciation to all this. And a person meditates on this apparently, and this should arouse a total bittul b'mitzvos. In other words, in the face of this great HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm totally not. Why does it remain bittul hayesh as opposed to bittul b'mitzvos? Again, the way it's brought in Chassidus of Avraham Avinu, Anechi Ofer Va'efer, and Moshe Rabbeinu Menachem Ma is a good illustration for the difference of bittul b'mitzvos and bittul hayesh. And the answer to this is because when you think about Memalik Kol Almin, Memalik Kol Almin's message is that you are. The whole message of Memalik Kol Almin is the Eibishter Hashem removing himself from the way he is for himself, by himself, with his infinite, from his infinite state, condensing that infinite energy and saying that Olam, world, should exist. Worlds in general, but every detail and every minute detail in Olam there's a message of Memalik Kol Almin. How do I know the message of Memalik Kol Almin is that? Because Memalik Kol Almin is creating that. Go tell the orange, really you're not an orange. No, the energy of the Memalik Kol Almin is giving me that energy that I should be produced as an orange. I should be existent as an orange with that taste and that appearance and so on. That's the energy which is telling me you ought to be so. So how could you tell me I'm not? I'm not so, I am so, because the Memalik Kol Almin is telling it. And the same thing, the apple, and the same thing, you could even say infinite types of, it's not truly infinite, but in the end of the day, there's billions of different characters that we see. And again, in the Daimon Tzemeh Chai Medaber dynamic, which we see in this Olam, which each one has a different expression, and each one has a different way it grows in taste and appearance and so on. So you cannot say that really it's not, when the whole message of Memalik Kol Almin is, yes, you do exist. And I went away from that level of Seviv Kol Almin, the way I'm for myself, by myself, in my infinite presence, which again, the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that message is that you do not exist, because the finite cannot exist, not exist in the face of the infinite. So the message of the infinite is you do not exist. The message of Memalik Kol Almin is to the contrary. Memalik Kol Almin, it's an energy which is creating Olamis. It's creating the finite. It's creating, even again in Elam Atzilus and Bria Yitzira Asiya, in every single level, on its own level, there's a certain expression of finitude as opposed to in the face of the infinite of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, true infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. For in the face of true infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Atzilus could not exist. Even Atzilus, which is an Olam which hosts the Ein Sof. So, but nonetheless, Atzilus is less the idea of finitude as opposed to Bria. And then later Yitzira. And this Olam itself is all about the finite reality, in other words, finite reality coming to expression. But who is causing all this? That's the Memalik Kol Almin message. That's the Memalik Kol Almin energy, and saying, Memalik Kol Almin, I'm creating you, so I'm creating you, my message is to you, you are, not you're not. I went away from the state of you being not, which is my infinity, and I'm creating you, I'm telling you, you are. That's what Memalik Kol Almin is all about. I'm Memalik Kol Almin. I'm giving existence, I'm vitalizing and vivifying Olamis, that itself saying, you are. but not only Eilumus in general, but every detail in Eilumus is saying, you are and you look like this, you're meant to be like this, so it's about me. Yet conversely, I know that because I sense so clearly and evidently that it's Hashem which is giving me my existence. Hashem is the Dvar Hashem which is vitalizing this detail and that detail and that detail. So what does it cause? Oh, that it's not, in the end of the day, it's not about me, it's about Hashem. In other words, my recognition, hence my submission and my total nullification to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is naturally aroused. And in this context, my fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is naturally aroused because I know, yes, I was created, but who is creating me? It's only the godly reality. The Pasuk says, Ki hu chayecha. Hashem is the energy. Hashem is the life. There's no other independent life. Oh, so I stand in an awe and a reverence in front of Hashem. But that would be the description of bittul b'mitzi, bittul hayesh, that I am, because that's the message of Mamalik Olam, like we say, but yet a total submissiveness. A yira, this is gadlus in yira. Even in the yira tato, it's called inferior because it cannot, by definition, because it's about the meditation and the pondering of the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way the Eibush does Mamalik Olam, which is the inferior dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which tell Eilam as they are, so it can't be a total nullification, a total message of we're not. V'nachnu ma, no, it's I am, but I am batal HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'nechi offer v'efer, it's offer, it's efer, which is again about it's not about me, but nonetheless, it's the bittul hayesh, it's I am recognizing that everything is Hashem and Hashem is everything. But that level which I'm pondering on is telling me that I exist. Hence it's inferior. Again, a line of the fact it's coming from the inferior expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As opposed to, as we're going to get to Bez Hashem in the next class, the supreme yira, the level of Moshe Rabbeinu Menachnu Ma, which he represented Chochma, the Chochmas HaTorah, the Kayach Ma, total nothingness in the face of Seviv Kalam, in the face of the way the Eibush just forms himself by himself, the infinite presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which from the perspective of the infinite presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there could not be Eilumus. Everything can't exist by definition. And when the Yid has its sensation, and the ponder of the meditation, hence the sensation of Seviv Kalam, the way the Eibush just forms himself by himself, in other words, in his infinite presence, that causes the sensation of totally nothingness. Because there is true, in the face of Seviv Kalam, in the face of the infinite of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, nothing truly exists, even now. We spoke about the mashal of the parable of a teacher teaching a student. If the teacher just needs to open up a little bit, and he teaspoons the child, and he says this, and sometimes a story, a parable, and so on. But this is a great, great goyin, a great, great master, which is knowledgeable, talking about the Chochmas HaTorah in every area, and Torah and his depth and his broad, expansive knowledge and understanding of Torah. But yet he condenses his presence, his all his knowledge, and contracts that enormous energy of information, a flow of information, in order to teaspoon the child. And the child is starting to pick up. In other words, he's saying you exist, and I'm recognizing your deficiencies as a starter. He starts teaspooning the child, and again he has to condense his great his great light, meaning to say his great knowledge. He has to contract it in order to teaspoon slowly, bit by bit, to the child. But the moment he'll open up and he'll express himself the way he knows the Chochmas HaTorah, the child will be lost completely, in a second. In the face of Hashem, Seviv Kalam, and Hashem, the Eibush, the infinite light of God, nothing truly exists. And that's the presence now. The Mamalik Kalam, it's not that Hashem stopped with the Seviv Kalam and then he begins Malak Kalam and Seviv Kalam is dormant. It's not like that. Take the same example. The same master, within a second notice, could start pouring out, if he has a different type of crowd as an example, start that profound sheer with the greatest amkus, with the greatest depth. And for that matter, even when he's teaching the child, he never lost it. At simultaneous to teaching the child, to condensing and contracting his great wisdom is fully intact. And the same thing Hashem. It's not or Seva Kalam or Mala Kalam. It's what we're in tune to. If our meditation, in other words, because Hashem's presence is primarily, it's the Seva Kalam, the way He's transcendent of being a creator. When He's sitting with in forms of by Himself, meaning to say, in His full glory of His infinite glory, and from the perspective of infinite glory, worlds, elements cannot exist by definition. It cannot exist in the face of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then the Eibishter decides to be Memala Kalam. So when the meditation is on Memala Kalam, it's again, it causes Bittul Hayesh, as opposed to when the meditation is in Seva Kalam, in the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that everything is not. That causes a total bittul, a total sensation of nothingness. V'nachnuma. The yira is far greater, and that's why it's defined as yira ilah, the supreme yira. And to have that sensation, you got to go through the steps of yira tata, a life of Torah mitzvahs, a life of learning Torah lishma, connecting to the chachmas HaTorah. And truly lishma, taka for the sake of Torah, a true God-fearing Jew, around the clock, 24 hours, in any state, in any position, any state, in any time frame, in any state frame, in front of people, not in front of people. Chader chadarim, you have that yira shamayim, and compliance with Hashem's Torah, learning Hashem's Torah, and complying with Hashem's mitzvahs, and being careful in machshava dibur u'ma'aseh, thought, speech, and action. You're able to appreciate, tune in to that. Tune in, not only talk about it verbally, or use verbal terms of Seviv Kalam or the Eid and stuff. Tune into it. And it's there to be tuned into from the day Hashem gave the Torah. But Eira, but after man there will be Yedu Mitzrayim Keni Hashem. And namely when the Yidden came to Mount Torah, Hashem exposed himself, Anochi Hashem Alikecha. That I expose my core essence, which is even Anochi is even higher than Shem Hashem. Here we're dealing with Shem Hashem, the infinite presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu.